The defeat to Sheffield United for Leicester City on Saturday was alarming and continued to raise questions around the football club. 3-0 down at half-time for the second game running and a mass exodus at King Power Stadium. So on the show today, we'll pore over that result, the strategy at the club and the rising pressure on manager Marti Cifuentes. I'm Owynn Palmer-Atkin, joined by former Foxes winger Matt Piper and Jake Watson from the big strong Leicester boys, and we're going to start by looking back on the 3-2 defeat against Sheffield United for Leicester on Saturday. And Pipes, really when you look at a performance, a result like that, it's hard to know where to start.
So you thought you'd throw it on my toes instead?
Yeah. 5-yard hospital pass straight in.
Thanks for that, Owynn. Well, I didn't. I've obviously watched the highlights of the game, but I wasn't at the game. I was in Dublin actually, but I had the notifications on, and it was just shocking. You know, you try and have a nice pint of Guinness in Ireland. Talking to all my Irish mates like that, I was.
Never do that again.
I won't. And it was like 1 minute, 1-0. What? And I was with quite a few Leicester fans, actually. All staunch Leicester fans. So I was like, it's 1-0 already. And they were like, what? Oh, my God. And then 2-0 after 3-4 minutes. And then 3-0 before half-time. And you just thought, what the hell is going on? And, yeah, it's hard to know. You know, I've questioned the spirit and the fight and the desire of some of the players at times. And, you know, the manager has to, you know, take that as well. We've been talking down about the hierarchy for some time and whether that needs a restructure. And we heard a few weeks ago that was the plan. So, there's a lot wrong at the football club at the minute. And you know, when things are wrong higher up, it affects lower down and out on the football pitch. And we've all seemed, as fans especially, have seemed to be calling that out for some time now. And, you know, change hasn't happened, and it hasn't happened nowhere near quickly enough with all our fears that we thought. So nothing really shocks you anymore, even when you're in Dublin having a pint with your Irish mates. Sorry, I did it again. And it goes 3-0 before half-time against the Sheffield United side that, yes, have picked up of late, but, you know, you wouldn't expect it to be 3-0 at the King Power at half-time.
Was it just compounding for you, everything that, you know, we've spoken about, not only this season, but in last season and the seasons gone by? Are you beginning to see the compounding effects of what all of that will lead to?
Yeah, I wouldn't even... Me certainly wouldn't even categorise it as the last two seasons. I mean, they've been desperately poor. But when I'm talking about, and when you use the word compounding effect, I think lots of us have raised concerns about the football club and the direction that it's heading in from the leadership at the very top all the way through the club for a number of years now. And when those issues don't get addressed in real time, this is what happens. And that's your fear as a fan. And it's been many people's fear for a long time. And, you know, when those concerns aren't listened to or actions taken against them, you start to see these kind of results. And that's why in the summer, it wasn't just me, it was thousands of us saying, we could go again, especially with the points deduction. We could be back in those times of many years ago of where we fall through the Championship and out into League One. And that's why nothing shocks you at the minute with the football club and the state of affairs on the pitch.
Jake, how would you look back on Saturday a couple of days on? And you say that with a grimacing smile on your face.
Well, no, it feels like I'm one of the few people in a unique position where I can actually tell you what happened at the game, because we did our podcast last night. Of the four of us, I was the only one who stayed beyond 30 minutes, and most of them had gone long before then. Yeah, where do you even start? And that's kind of the issue, isn't it? That it's just a catalogue of errors and issues that we've all been speaking about for such a long time. And it just feels like we bumble from kind of crossroads to crossroads, and it feels like we're at another one. And, as each one passes, we seem to make the wrong decisions. And, we may have a decision here regarding the manager that we really kind of don't want to have to make. But I'm sure we'll kind of then get into that in terms of then the looming decision of what's happening with the director of football. Because if that isn't going to be John Rudkin, then whoever decides to sack the manager, the person who's hiring the new one should be the new director of football. And so anyway, yeah, just so much to kind of work our way through. I mean, the performance was horrific, and to be honest, the 3-2 it flatters us, doesn't it? And it was almost frustrating in some ways to see some people being relatively positive on social media afterwards, because the scoreline obviously looked a lot close. But the reality of the fact is that Sheffield United aren't a great team, and when you're 3-0 up at half time, you've got one job, and that is to shut shop and contain. And look, they very nearly messed it up, but ultimately the game was won at half time, wasn't it? And the 3-2, if anything, made Marti and the performance look better than what it was.
You heard Pipes talking a few moments ago about the compounding effect really at Leicester City, but also how that could result in a Luton type scenario if it continues to go in this way. And you look at the difference between the points between the relegation zone and the playoffs, and second place for Leicester City, which is ideally where they would obviously want to be at this stage in the season. Actually, the gaps between those two places are tightening almost, really. Do you have that same fear that Pipes talked through?
Oh, absolutely. And I think everyone, they need to listen to Pipes and other people who are saying this. If you are looking at those playoff positions, you need a reality check really, really quickly. We have a looming, points deduction, I would assume. But let's say, for instance, it's 6 points. That takes us to 1 point above the relegation places. We've got an attack that cannot score goals. We've got a group of defenders who make error after error. We're in a position that come January where we're probably going to have to move players on and unlikely to be able to bring new ones in. And the only players you can effectively, and the new ones you can call upon, are 17 and 18-year-old kids, talented as they may well be. And as much as we want to see these guys progress into the first team, this is going to be a huge ask, because it's a terrible dressing room to be moving into. The issues at this football club are huge, and you talk about then the Luton effect. Other clubs big clubs have dropped from Premier League into the Championship to League One. I know we've done it before, but perhaps slightly different circumstances, because we're in the Championship for about 10 years, and it's kind of a bit more of a slow decline. But people within that football club still think or harbour ambitions of getting into the playoffs and potentially back into the Premier League. It is not going to happen this season, and then the task of then getting back into the Premier League is going to get tougher and tougher year on year as the parachute payments run out. So this is a club already desperately struggling financially. Less money is going to come into this football club next year and then the year after that. And it is at the moment incredibly difficult. I know people may think this is kind of quite reactionary because you've lost 2 games of football and it's scaremongering or it's been overly negative. But if you look at the cold hard facts of the number of players that are also going to leave this football club at the end of the year, so they're going to have to bring in a load more, on significantly less money, the far more likely scenario is that we are either battling at the bottom end of the Championship, or we drop into League One. That is the stark reality that this club is facing. And when we kind of walked from the Premier League down into Championship the first time around, with Maddison, etc., people failed to kind of acknowledge the severity of the situation they're in. This is a very, very similar situation. A group of players who are paid huge amounts of money, who are underperforming and don't want to be here. And other clubs are going to be fighting tooth and nail to either survive or to get in the playoffs. This group of players is not going to do that. And we all need to realise that very, very quickly.
You talked there about the financial situation as well, Jake. And actually, when you look back at the statement released by Susan Whelan, the former chief executive of Leicester City, when they were relegated from the Premier League the first time, she talked about the financial situation being something, and that relegation being something that would actually continue for a number of years up to the end of this season before they were able to recover just from that relegation. To then be promoted and be relegated again just puts into perspective that the kind of financial reparations that football clubs will have to pay for if you have budgeted to finish in the top 8 to then drop out of that division. And that goes alongside everything else that is just such a real concern at the moment.
But, when we first kind of failed the PSR, or we survived, or we suffered that shock relegation, and there's been 8 transfer windows since then. Other than perhaps spending big money, like, 20, 30 million pounds, what steps really have the club made to really address the desperate, mistakes that we've made financially with regards predominantly to wages? Now, when you suffer, in that way, when we got relegated with that huge wage bill, and you then fail PSR, you then fail PSR again the next year, and then the next year, and then it's very likely we're going to fail it again this year. And then you look at next year and thinking, well, it's probably going to be the same again. But yet you're still looking at situations where we are paying more wages than anyone else around us within our division. And even last year, then in the Premier League, bless him, Oliver Skipp and 25 million pounds. But, even look at the likes of, De Cordova-Reid. He left Fulham, a mid-table Premier League team, to join Leicester. Why? Because we offered him a better contract. This is a club who has no money. What are you doing giving someone over the age of 30 a 3-year deal for more money than a stable Premier League club is doing? Jannik Vestergaard, the same. Jordan Ayew, the same. A club under serious financial constraints offering out multi-million pound, multi-year contracts to these players. And you're sat there thinking, well, obviously you're in financial problems. And this is why you're still in financial problems, because these players, A, are long past their best, and B, are getting paid far, far too much. So, the financial issues, yes, that relegation, 4 years ago was a big shock. And for many people, you could have said it's, not really anything they could have really accounted for. It just kind of all happened at once. It was a bit of a, a bit of a storm. But since then, they've continued to make, huge errors. And ultimately then, these financial situations and the decline of this football club, it lays at the door of the people handing out those contracts, in my honest opinion.
Pipes, when you hear Jake running through, I suppose, what is in the end and has become a very long list of problems that not just Jake has with the football club, but actually, we're talking about thousands and thousands of fans here who have voiced very, very similar things, whether that be on this show, on Jake's show, on other radio stations, on other podcasts, on social media, on forums, etc. It just shows the kind of stark nature of where the fan base is right now, and that was a fan base that the football club were trying hard at the beginning of this season in order to try and rebuild that connection. But again, as Jake talks about there, transfer windows that have gone by, managerial appointments in the past that haven't worked, 2 relegations in 3 seasons for a club that only a few years ago was in a European semi-final. It becomes, again, and it's another 5-yard hospital pass, it becomes difficult about where to start with this kind of thing.
Yeah, it has to start with the owner, ultimately. He's the one that is supposed to be, leading the club, making the decisions, and the ones that he has in power directly under him. As from what Jake has just said, and so eloquently put, and easy to understand, which is sometimes you can get sort of carried away with the wording and sort of how you're trying to describe a club, but he just did it really well in how he just delivered that. And what is stark with those words and those facts that he just spoke about was you can't get into that kind of trouble if you have strong leadership and people that will make decisions in real time. And that's what we've not had. And that has always been my issue with the leadership at this football club for even the years that we did well, even the times under Maresca. I think you can look pre that, sort of a year or 2 after Brendan was in. I'm sort of talking back to go back to that point.
Well, really, when we talk about these big contracts and when that, and when we did the State of Leicester City podcast a few months ago, part and parcel of the contract conversation was the kind of days after Leicester City won the FA Cup, because that was that summer transfer window where the club went out and brought in Jannik Vestergaard, Boubakary Soumare, Patson Daka, and Ademola Lookman on loan, who has then obviously gone on to do brilliant things with Atalanta, etc. But that was the turning point really for contractual situations for Leicester City.
Yeah, I mean, why this has gone particularly bad is because it is difficult running a football club. Of course it is. And it means difficult decisions at times. And it's the worst thing you can do is try and cater for, lots of different voices. You have to have a clear plan, and this is the way we're going, and a clear strategy of how are we going to get back to where we want to be at that point in the Premier League. And I don't think there was one. And that's because I don't know as much as these guys. I only look from the outside in, but when you're not seeing a clear plan and a strategy, we had that when we won the Premier League. We had that under the early years of Brendan. We moved away from all those things that were working for us. Some will say, and, maybe rightly so, that we tried to go to that next level. And, we recruited poorly and we didn't quite get there. But then you can reassess and have a different plan and create a different strategy. I don't think we did. And I think Jake used the right kind of words. It's like bumbling around. Oh, let's try this for a transfer window. Oh, that's not work. Oh, let's try this. Like when you put a strategy in place, you got to stick with it. You got to stick with the people that are doing it. And I don't think we've done that. And and to me, that screams weak leadership. And that's why that I do point my fingers, for the past however long, saying that I think that's the problem.
As Pipes rightly says, Jake, it's sometimes difficult to look from the outside, not knowing the inner workings of the football club about what a strategy looks like and how that strategy is being implemented. A good way of looking at it, though, and being able to get a temperature of that is recruitment, but also I think probably a better way of looking at it is managerial recruitment more than anything, because managers have their say on players, playing styles, etc. But you would expect with a strategy for the managerial appointments to be somewhat lined up. But to go from Brendan Rodgers to Dean Smith to Enzo Maresca, Steve Cooper, Ruud van Nistelrooy, Marti Cifuentes doesn't stack up all that well when you're looking for a clear alignment on strategy.
Oh yeah, no, that's clear to see, isn't it, for everyone, and well remembered for the order of those managers. I think we're going to be maybe soon adding another name, and be interesting to see what the latest philosophy that they're going to try at the football club. But yeah, it's clear to see, isn't it, that there's no alignment whatsoever, and it's probably in modern football, the director of football is. I think I'd go as far as to say the most important position. This is the guy who needs to work closely with the manager. He's the one who oversees the recruitment, and delivers that player. He's the one who then talks about the new contracts and then moving players on. It's an incredibly difficult job, and John Rudkin, prior to being the director of football at Leicester, wasn't a director of football. So it doesn't take perhaps a genius to work out that he's struggling in the position. And if you were top, and you were looking and watching, and to be honest, I really don't know how much he watches these days. But if he was watching that and looking at the money he was spending, and then perhaps looking at the teams around him at the similar levels of money that they were spending, you'd ask serious questions. You would sit down with John and ask him to kind of justify or talk through some of the decisions that he's made. But it does appear. And as I said, it is difficult because you can never truly, honestly know exactly the inner workings of the football club. This may all be coming from top, and John is just literally doing as he's being told, and this is what Top's telling him to do. It's highly unlikely, but ultimately we don't know. But yeah, it just feels that for John, he's desperately struggling. He's not perhaps got the resource in terms of the help around him. He's perhaps not got the knowledge, in terms of the scouting database. And then as far as managers go, it does feel that each time we come to a window where we're signing players or looking for a new manager, this is agent led, and he's given a spreadsheet of potential managers, and they send in their CV, and he decides off the back of that, as opposed to a director of football having a vision and saying, do you know what, that manager in this country and that division is doing this, he'd be perfect for the way that we want to play and we want to recruit. But it just feels that vision has not existed at this football club for a long, long time.
The comparisons can be made between a manager like Ruud van Nistelrooy and Marti Cifuentes and to a certain extent Enzo Maresca in terms of, and it is kind of pale comparisons, you have to say, in terms of the gameplay and the style and the tactical side of things. Ruud van Nistelrooy told me, I sat there and asked him the question when I said, what is your philosophy? And he talked about an inverted fullback, box midfield. And I don't think we saw it more than 3 times maybe. And then actually, when you consider this week as well, or the week just gone, the build-up to the Sheffield United game, where Chris Wilder is coming out talking about how disappointed he was not to have got the Leicester City job. Now, this is a totally different style of manager. We know Gary O'Neill was also interviewed for the role, and however many more. But Gary O'Neill, Chris Wilder, Marti Cifuentes, even that trio, if you just took those as a 3, Jake, that doesn't correlate with what style have they decided to go with, i.e. possession-based football, if you want to use a real simple term of looking at it. Even that doesn't kind of make sense. It's probably the simplest way to put it.
The last 2 managers have been 2 of the most confusing managers I've witnessed in my lifetime supporting Leicester, because Owynn, you've asked the questions and we've heard their answers, and they talk a fantastic game, and I was so conflicted with Ruud, and I'm now finding myself similarly conflicted with Marti. They're telling you what they want to do, they're telling you that they've seen these problems and they want to fix it, and there's this, that and the other, but then game after game you see the same formation, the same players, and you're thinking, well, if you've identified an issue here, what are you doing to fix it? And Ruud was went through that long run, didn't we, of not even scoring a goal at home. But he didn't change the front 3 at any point. And you're thinking, at what point, Ruud, do you think that maybe the front 3 may be the issue here? But then you listen to then some of Marty's quotes, and he came out a little while ago. I don't think it was with you. I think it was perhaps an in-house interview. I'm not quite sure. I can't remember. Apologies. But he was saying how it was difficult to put in some of the young players, and that the senior players were essentially blocking the path for them. You're thinking, well, hang about, Marti, you're not the one picking the team here. Because if those senior players are letting you down, then you need to bring in that young player or try something else. And this is the thing, it's so confusing that Enzo's got this philosophy. Steve Cooper, to a degree, I wouldn't necessarily call it a philosophy, but he's clearly got a way of playing which has been similar at every club he's been at. But with Marti and Ruud, what they're telling you and what you're seeing are 2 completely different things. So you're thinking, is the powers above telling these managers you've got to pick these players, and the managers being too weak, or you just don't know? And honestly, it's one of the most confusing things, because at times you want to have sympathy for Ruud and you want to have sympathy for Marti, but it's very difficult to when they're picking the same players over and over again and not trying different things and then complaining when it doesn't work. So it's honestly, it's a bizarre place, because the way that things are going, Marti will lose his job. But you then just wonder when in 5, 10, 15 years' time, you're going to read the autobiography of Ruud and Martin. They'll tell you all these stories and things that we didn't realise. It's just, you just don't know, do you?
Pipes, in terms of looking at it from a inside football world perspective, of which out of the 3 of us, you are the only one who can do that. But what might those reasons be behind what Jake just mentioned there and brought up around Ruud van Nistelrooy and Marti Cifuentes and other managers saying one thing and saying they recognise problems, but then picking the same players going forward? Because I can imagine as a manager, it must be difficult when you have a group of senior players who are on big money to kind of leave those guys out to bring in a younger player, and then if the results don't go well, there's what I'm trying to say, I suppose, that there's a balance to be struck for a manager in terms of the senior players at the club, making sure the younger players get the right opportunity, maintaining really a level of financial stability in those players with PSR. That's almost become part of the coach's job now as well, to make sure that value's retained in these players.
Yeah, I mean, it's so multifaceted now, I think. And if you look at the better managers, and what I mean by that is not always the biggest names. So if you took De Zerbi, for instance, who came to Brighton, really like him. He was kind of an unknown sort of commodity at the time. He had done well previously, obviously, but he wasn't a big name. He comes into Brighton, and what would have happened is, because Brighton have done this well for so many years, they would have given him a whole structured strategy and remit for the job of what they want, and then Brighton as a football club communicate that to the fans, and it's not left to chance. I think these other clubs that think we're in a mess right now, we need to go out and get a manager that hasn't got a 5-10 year plan, or we're going to really get behind for a certain period of time. We need a firefighter. That's why Sean Dyche is always going to get jobs. You know, David Moyes to a certain extent. There's managers that can come in and work really quickly to turn around what's going on the football pitch if it's heading in the wrong direction, and they can sort of stabilise it. And I think that's what we were looking for with someone like Steve Cooper. They didn't see him as a long-term appointment. I think they just brought him in. Let's calm all this down. We don't really know where we're going as a direction of a football club, but that all screams to me lack of strategy and lack of direction. Now, the ones I'm very similar to Jake. Why I found Rude confusing, and certainly not so much Marti when they first brought him in, but we're not privy to them conversations that happen at a football club. Because what I was talking about in the summer, and a lot of the other fans were, no, you can't chuck a load of 17-year-olds into the position that the club are in now. But you know, at the start of the season, if you're communicating with Marti and he's brought in on the fact that we've got a lot of young players that we want to start introducing into the team. There's a lot of players that by the end of next season will be gone. So we want to slowly start phasing them out. We want to get behind you. We want to communicate that to the fan base that this is probably going to be a bit of a transition season. We're going to get lots more young players in the side. We're going to go back to that model of bringing through younger players because we've got a glut of them at the minute. We're not going to sign any players that are over 26 years old and, you know, are on massive contracts. We're going to sort the wage bill out throughout this season and the following season. We're going to get behind you. We're going to give you the time, and we're going to communicate that message to the fan base. That's when you sign someone like Marti. You can't have Marti come on and start saying, oh, this is going to take loads of time. That's what he told us in that interview me and you did with him. And then all of a sudden not back him or say that, because now the fans are going to start booing when you're not getting those results. And he's not a quick working manager as coming in and being able to work with all these multi-million pound players and introduce some of the youth into it. And now we've not seen Munger for 6 weeks. I can't put him in. 16. Got to get results. So now all of a sudden it's a mess. And it's because I think there's no clear strategy. So I'm not saying that I would sack Marti now at this very moment, because I feel all you're going to do is bring someone else in and hand the mess over to them, and nothing's going to get sorted. And that's why I've got the problem with the hierarchy more than I've got with the manager. Could he do things in real time? Of course he could. And has he made mistakes? I think he has done. But I think it's unfair to keep pointing the finger at him when a lot of the mess is going on above him as well.
Well, naturally, the results over the last 7 days have increased the pressure on Marti Cifuentes. The Sheffield United fans were singing "You're getting sacked" in the morning on Saturday after they scored their third, and it was actually met by some Leicester fans joining in as well. Now, it was even cause for some bookmakers to open betting on the next Leicester City manager on Saturday night following that game against Sheffield United, with the odds on Michael Carrick dropping rapidly into Sunday morning. Now, the Foxes boss Marti Cifuentes spoke in his post-match press conference with the written press on those chants and also the rising pressure on his job as well. Pipes, where do you stand on what Marti Cifuentes had to say there?
It lends itself a little bit to what I was obviously saying, but I don't think you can just push the manager out in front of you and let him talk like that. And, you know, the club are not talking in that way or communicate that with the fan base at the start of the season. And we've always highlighted that as a problem from the club, I think. And what they did this summer is like, oh, let's let the manager go out and speak. And, you know, that's the club being transparent. It's not. You know, we still don't know. A lot of the fan base take guesses. We take guesses in the media. We don't know the direction that the club want to go in. I think the chairman comes out and does an interview. It's with an in-house media team. You know, he don't want no scrutiny. He don't want the difficult questions. And that's why I said he has to ask the ultimate question of himself, that is this what you really want? Because if it is, it takes a lot of, you know, commitment, hard work, intelligence, putting the right people in the right positions, delegating, moving others on that may be really close to you over the years. And it's a difficult job, and more of a long-term one than I think he might, you know, perceive, if you understand what I mean.
As in, Kuntop, this might be a longer-term issue and project that he might have thought it was when he hired Marti Cifuentes?
Yeah, I mean, the way that they've been hiring and firing managers and the different types of managers screams there is no strategy there. For me, you know, we've sort of flipped and flopped our way between different managers without a clear plan and pathway forward. And that's why I was hoping when they brought someone in like Marti at the start of the season, it was going to be an emphasis on, you know, youth and really wanting to wear the badge and, you know, moving away from the, as Jake said, the, you know, signing 33, 34-year-olds that other Premier League sides don't want and will take them and give them better wages. Like, you can't run a football club like that anymore and expect sustained success. You know, I wouldn't say we got lucky with Maresca. I think he's an excellent manager. I think he's proving that now at Chelsea. You know, he was a real talent that had something special about him where he could, in real time, even though he sticks to his philosophy, he can get a tune out of the players quite quickly. But also, he's clearly building something there for the future. And I thought that was a poison chalice of a job. But at the minute, he's really making it work at Chelsea. And it shows, I think, that we had a very talented manager that came in that season, did what he did. But they're very hard to find. And if you're just kind of guessing and hoping that hopefully this is another one of them type of guys, but you haven't given strict, clear strategy and plan of how you're going to move this football club forward, you're going to struggle.
Marti Cifuentes spoke in that press conference where he was speaking to BBC Sports, Andrew, a lawyer there, that he felt the confidence and the backing of those above him in the hierarchy of the football club. Now, naturally, it would be outrageous if he'd said anything different. So, you know, this is ordinarily what managers say in these kind of situations. But he was talking there about what you had said, really, that this was a longer term plan. He said something similar to me post match as well, and that actually they're working through those, and this wasn't going to be a quick fix. Do Leicester City need a quick fix right now, though, and where do they go from here, and how much pressure is Marti Cifuentes under?
Well, he's under a lot of pressure, clearly, and he isn't without. And I'm sure he'd say this. I'm sure he's said it previously because I've sort of heard him talk down about his own pitfalls and where he can develop as a manager. He's struggling at the minute. I mean, you look at that at the weekend and, you know, 3 down before half-time against a side that has not started the season well at all, but he hasn't, you know, Chris Wilder hasn't got the type of players, and it's not the same size club as Leicester City is. You know, Marty's making errors as well, and what he's really struggling with is to find, you know, a team that can get results in the short term as well. And that's where he's falling down at the minute. And that has to change very quickly. Otherwise, you know, we all know what's going to happen. This is the Championship football. I suggest if he gets beat at the weekend, he's gone.
Jake, where are you on Marti Cifuentes after what you just heard there?
Yeah, I think probably also that he's maybe 1 or 2 bad results away from potentially losing his job. Kind of backtracking a little bit in terms of what you guys said a few minutes ago is I don't think there's any point sacking Marti. I really don't, because as I said, the manager who comes in, he's going to walk into the same situation with the same resources. I don't think he's a bad manager. I think he's an average manager, and what it takes at the moment to be successful at this club is an exceptional manager. Nigel Pearson, when he came in and the situation he walked into wasn't too dissimilar, he was an exceptional manager. Enzo Maresca, I believe now, is also proving himself to be an exceptional manager. So you can't really blame Marti for not being exceptional. That's not necessarily his fault. Same with Ruud. But again, just listening to him then, and this is where the conflict and the confusion comes from. And he's saying that he's aware this fan base isn't particularly happy, prior to him coming in, and you would have thought he'd done his research and seen the issues and aware of perhaps some of the problems that had preceded him. It beggars belief that you see all that and you say you know all that, and it took as long as what it did for Ben Nelson to get an opportunity. I know he's obviously injured now, but we desperately need him in. We had a situation with Aluko where our left back all season has been underperforming. He's been really struggling, and one of the most talented young players in the English football system, and the club in 23 as the captain, didn't get a single minute of action until his debut against Southampton, and then lo and behold, he wasn't kind of up to match speed and wasn't perhaps quite ready. You've got Louis Page, who started 2 games back-to-back against, I think it was Birmingham and Charlton. We won both of those games. Signed his professional contract and hasn't been back on the football pitch since. Jeremy Monga, as a 16-year-old kid, has showed flashes. You've got Jake Evans, who continues to score goals in the 23s. And our front line have got 1 or 2 goals between them all season, and again hasn't got a single minute. I can guarantee you that if we'd been 3-0 down to Sheffield United at the weekend, but Aluko, Nelson, Page, Monga and Evans were playing in that team, the fans would not have left. So as a manager, to say you understand the issues and you understand why the fans are frustrated, but to do the exact same thing as the manager before you and not transition these hugely talented players into a football team where they deserve their opportunity because they're talented, they're ready, and the players in front of them are not performing, that's where it becomes really, really difficult. And I just think he made a rod for his own back so early on when he decided not to bring through the younger players, and he now finds himself in a really difficult position to bring them through it at this stage. So it's very difficult for him right now. I expect we will lose to Derby at the weekend, and I just think really it's now the manner. If he'd lost 4 or 5 to Sheffield United, he probably would have lost his job. But with it being 3-2, he saves it. If it's a 2-1 away at Derby, again, he probably saves it. But if we're losing 4-0, then I think it could be curtains. But then Owynn, at that point, we just bumble into another scenario of what happens next and what manager comes in next. So it's pretty dire and pretty desperate, to be honest. It really is that bad at the moment.
Just a quick tally up, I think, and I'm sure if I'm wrong, someone will 100% correct me. I make it 43 appearances between Jordan Ayew, Julian Carranza and Patson Daka so far this season, and 3 goals between them. Jordan Ayew has 2 goals, 1 assist. Julian Carranza yet to register either a goal or assist, and Patson Daka a goal and 2 assists so far this season. All of that really. So you're talking 3 goals, 3 assists between your 3 strikers in 43 league games combined. And
worth pointing out as well that those 3 strikers will be the highest earning 3 strikers in the division as a combined 3. So it's not just that they're not scoring goals. They are massively, massively underperforming. So, and then as I go back to the first point, we've got strikers who can't score and defenders who make mistakes every single game, and a severe lack of options in the midfield areas. So, what do you do? And we can't bring any players in January. So, sorry, I'm being far too... I'm making myself sad, Owynn, just talking, so I'm going to stop.
I was going to say, I was just watching you there go round and round and round in circles, and it just getting worse, and the water rising on the Teams call. Pipes, go on.
No, I was going to say that this is what I mean. So I'm a manager. Yeah, let's say that I'm a manager. I go into a football club at the start of the year. I know it's a mess.
You'd never be able to be a manager with that hat. Sorry.
Well, maybe not. I go into the football club at the start of the year, and I've got they're obviously interviewing me, but I've got a list of questions that I want to know. And if you think back to the managers that were on our list that we got very close to signing, and there was at least 3, I think, that decided they didn't want the Leicester job.
Yeah.
Yeah, over the years, over the recent years, Graham Potter being one of them on 2 occasions. Now, you look at that from the outside and you think that there's something that either the chairman or the director of football or the powers that be at the football club are saying in these interviews, or more importantly, not saying. And that's why I think there's not a clear strategy. Because if you're Marti now, and you're telling us at the start of the season that the idea is to bring in and introduce more of the youth to this side, and then all of a sudden, and this is the difficult part, it's to stick with what you're saying when things get tough. In those moments of adversity, and you're thinking, a 16-year-old centre midfield, a 16-year-old winger, I've got 3 Premier League guys that have scored 3 goals or whatever, in the last 40-odd games, but they're not scoring. So then I put a 17-year-old up front. But at the start of the season, this is why I don't think there's any clear strategy with this club. If the club have said to you, this is what we're really hoping for with you, Marta. We'll give you the space and the time. We want you to develop the youth. We want you to introduce them to the side. When you're losing games of football, you will still introduce those players into that because you got the backing from the club at the start of the season and they told you that is their strategy. Managers, where it gets a little tight and all of a sudden you don't see any young players on the pitch or in the team and they can't get anywhere near it and you revert back to the old experience, they'll get me through this tough period. There's clearly no strategy there to do with what Marty's saying, and that's why he's moved away from it.
So, because you were nodding your head when Jake was saying that if Nelson, Aluko, Monga, Silko Thomas, Will Alves, if he hadn't gone out on loan, Jake Evans, etc., in that 11, and they were 3-0 down at half-time against, let's face it, a Sheffield United squad that is packed full of EFL experience, got lots of Premier League appearances there, has England, former England internationals in Bamford and Ings on the bench, and Tom Cannon, obviously, which Leicester City know all about him, Gus Hamer, etc. The list goes on. They do have whilst it might not be Premier League standard, they do have a very good squad. But if they're 3-0 down at home against Sheffield United and all of those players have started, that fans wouldn't be leaving, and you were nodding your head at that.
Yeah, and similarly, even if they're on the bench and you bring those guys on at half-time, when it's that, people wouldn't be leaving 5 minutes after and you're not back into the game yet. There's an element of why, especially with the financial troubles that this club has had over the recent years, there is an element where you can say that this is the direction we are going in. We don't want any more PSR. We don't want any more financial situations with the club. We're not going to go out and buy 60, 70 million pound players and put them on 70, 80 grand a week. We're not going to do that as a football club anymore. And when you communicate that message, but then you align a manager that can develop that kind of blueprint moving forward and develop those young individuals, it all aligns. And that's when you're going to get better results on the football pitch and the backing of your fan base, not 3-0 down to Sheffield United and the stadium's empty. At
some point, Jake, there's going to have to be a tangible improvement for Leicester City. Where do you think it goes from here?
Well, a horrible question.
I've dished out a few of those tonight, haven't I?
I think the manager his only answer, it seems to be, is to rely on the individual brilliance of some very good players he has got within his squad. Abdul Fatawu and Jordan James at the moment are probably the only 2 players in attacking areas who have delivered anything close to any kind of of output. I know Steffi's scored a couple of goals recently, and hopefully he can continue that. But yeah, the reality is that there's nothing you can look back on this season and say, that game, we were brilliant. If he can do that again, great. We've not played well, I don't think, for 90 minutes or significantly less all season. But we have ground out the odd result and we've won the games through individual brilliance. You're talking about Fatawu's goal away at Charlton. You're looking at the Fatawu's cross for Jordan James's header in the last minute against Norwich. We do have players capable of outstanding kind of ability and moments which far exceed anything else in the division. So look, we are capable of grinding out results, and we are capable of scoring outstanding goals. But I don't think overnight, and I don't think in the coming weeks, just suddenly going to see a cohesive, performance, and attacking creativity and looking at a newly kind of impressive team. I just don't see it happening, and it's really difficult to see that this season. But there is enough quality, as I said, with the individuals that we have to score goals and win games. But, touch wood, if we find ourselves in a situation where Abdul gets injured or Jordan James gets injured, the situation becomes incredibly desperate, because you don't see there where the creativity and the moments of inspiration comes from. So, it's a lot of pressure on those players, Owynn, to be honest, to step up. But, there is quality in there. We just need them to kind of deliver the goods, because, looking around it, it's difficult to see where else those goals and those wins come from.
In terms of more focused on Marti Cifuentes, how do you see that playing out? Do you envisage a backing and support in terms of the long-term project, which he's spoken about quite frequently, or like we say, results when bookmakers start opening markets on next manager, it tends to be because results are clearly in a trend where things seem to be heading that way. Is the belief in this project enough there for you?
Again, it's so difficult, isn't it? Because there's so many layers to this one. What was Marti told when he came in? Was he told that the ambition and the expectation was to at least be in the playoffs this season? Or was he told that there would be patience there? What is the financial situation of the football club? Is there some clause within there that, say, for instance, they do decide to think it's not moving in the right direction and they want to sack Marti? Are they paying off his full contract, or a manageable sum, which makes the decision perhaps a little bit easier? We don't know, and we've kind of been caught off guard, haven't we? Where it all spells and goes back to the Rodgers era, where they hung on too long. So with Ruud, again, it seemed like a contract situation, so we didn't know what they were going to do, and eventually it did happen. With Steve Cooper, they potentially kind of bit the bullet and pulled the trigger a bit too soon. So it's just so difficult to say. I don't think they want to sack Marti. I think they're desperate not to, because of the financial implications that involves. And that's why I do think it would take some really bad defeats where they've got no alternative but to sack him is the scenario. And it's so difficult. It's so difficult. As I said, I would keep him. But if we sit here next week after the back of another 2 games and we've gone 3-0 behind in both of them, my answer is probably going to be different. That's just the way football is, isn't it?
And Jake made a brilliant point earlier, Pipes, that actually, when you are looking at the incoming changes at a football club like Leicester City, where you are expecting new chief executive, new commercial director, new technical director who is going to be supporting the current director of football, John Rudkin, but actually when you read the reports as done by John Percy at The Telegraph, it actually looks like a real more hands-on job than what it perhaps seems from the outside. That if those people are incoming and the club are investing in those sorts of areas, then does it make sense to be kind of haphazard with managerial changes? Because as we went through the list earlier. I mean, Enzo Maresca, Steve Cooper, Ruud van Nistelrooy and Marti Cifuentes, all since May last year. You then start getting into kind of Watford territory.
Well, my honest answer, with the way that the club's been ran for the last few years, is it wouldn't surprise me if Marti loses against Derby at the weekend, gets sacked, we employ a new manager, and then 3 weeks later all these changes come in, and the technical director is used to working with someone like Maresca or Marti or Ruud van Nistelrooy and that type, and we employ someone like Dave Bassett. And I'm not joking, because it's like, You know,
I didn't know who was going to come out of your mouth, and then I was not expecting Dave Bassett.
To be fair, Dave Bassett was a good manager. I liked him. But you get my point. So what would make sense to me is that the changes are made. They're brought in, and then, you know, we assess how Marti is at that point. Are they the type? Are they aligned? Because that's how it needs to be. And that's what I would hope. But results will do the talking. If he's 3-0 down at half-time against Derby at the weekend and loses the game ultimately, I would imagine that he will be sacked after the game.
Well, it is a big game for Leicester City on Saturday as they make the trip, as Pipes rightly says, to take on Derby County in the Championship. We'll be back on Thursday on When You're Smiling to look ahead to that game a little bit more with all the key headlines from Marti Cifuentes' pre-match press conference for the first meeting between the Foxes and the Rams in the league since 2014.